The stars out here don't twinkle. They burn, cold and sharp, like the eyes of a predator waiting for you to bleed out. I've always preferred them this way. Unyielding, unblinking, honest. They don't lie to you like people do. It wasn't always like this. There was a time, or so the stories go, when humanity spanned 1,000 worlds, planets teeming with life, with art, with meaning. We had an empire then, an empire of stars. But that was long before the Eidolons came. They showed up at the edges of known space, a biomechanical fleet gliding in from the galactic periphery like predators testing the waters. At first, they sent emissaries, cybernetic humanoids offering gifts. They promised humanity the future, genetic perfection, limitless energy, unity. All it would cost was our free will. We called it domination. They called it salvation. The Eidolons didn't see themselves as conquerors. They saw themselves as surgeons, cutting away the diseased parts of us to prepare for something worse. The first worlds to fall gave in willingly. Why wouldn't they? Peace, order, immortality, who wouldn't want that? But the price was steep. Those who accepted their gifts weren't human anymore. They became drones, their individuality stripped away, their bodies and minds integrated into the Eidolon collective. Resistance came too late. Now the galaxy is a shattered graveyard. The remnants of humanity, what's left of us, scrabble to survive in the shadow of dying stars and decayed empires. Some fight back, others submit. Me? I just get by, one job at a time. There's no saving the galaxy, no beating the Eidolons. All we can do is stave off the inevitable. I sat on the edge of a crumbling ferrocrete outcropping, my boots dangling into the toxic void below, and watched the distant shimmer of a shuttle descending through the thick haze of Klein 7's atmosphere. The settlement was a haphazard patchwork of rust-streaked domes and spires, every inch of it carved from the corpses of older, better worlds. The air smelled of burnt metal and acidic rain, a perfect bouquet for the end of humanity's reign. My target was down there somewhere. A name, a price, and a history that didn't matter. Not to me, anyway. The initiative wanted her alive. Why? I didn't ask. Questions weren't part of the job description. Besides, the more you know, the harder it gets to pretend you're not a monster. The heads-up display in my left eye activated, overlaying the settlement's perimeter with green schematics. It traced my target's last known location, District 7, the Barrens, the kind of place even scavengers avoided unless they were desperate. Or hiding. I inhaled deeply, savoring the momentary quiet. My neural implants buzzed in the back of my skull, a constant reminder of who I'd been, what I'd done. Tactical overlays, predictive algorithms, battlefield optimization. 1 billion credits of initiative tech drilled into my brainstem, and all I had to show for it was a lifetime of regret and voices that didn't belong to me. "Rook!" the voice crackled over my comms. "We got a trace. Civilian escort headed west, moving fast. Coordinates incoming." I didn't bother responding. Instead, I let gravity pull me forward, sliding down the crumbling slope into the heart of the district. My boots hit the ground with a dull thud, kicking up plumes of chemical dust. The streets here were narrow, flanked by makeshift shacks and collapsed scaffolding. Figures moved behind opaque plasteel windows, watching but never intervening. That was the unspoken rule in places like this. Keep your head down, and maybe you'll live another day. The trace led me to an alley, a tight, filthy crevice barely wide enough for a person to slip through. I paused, listening. The noise of an unshielded generator, the sharp clink of metal. And then, voices, low, hurried, desperate. "Please, he's just a child," one voice pleaded. A woman. I stepped into the alley, silent as a shadow. My implants ran the numbers, optimal approach vectors, threat probabilities, response timings. The voices in my head muttered conflicting strategies, overlapping until they became static. I forced them down, focusing on the here and now. The woman had her back to me, crouched over a small figure wrapped in ragged cloth. She was younger than I'd expected, early 30s maybe, with dark, matted hair and a face that had seen more hardship than joy. The child beside her was motionless, unnaturally still. "You have two options," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Come quietly or make this difficult. Either way, you're leaving with me." She froze. Her shoulders tensed, and she slowly turned to face me. Her eyes were wild, but there was no fear in them, just defiance. "Stay away from him," she hissed, shielding the boy with her body. "He's not like the others. He—" "Don't care," I interrupted. "Initiative wants you alive. Him too, if possible. Now move." The child stirred, and I saw the glint of metal beneath his skin. His eyes, when they opened, glowed weakly, an unnatural light that made my stomach twist. Eidolon tech, not fully assimilated but close. I leveled my pulse rifle at the woman. "Explain now." She didn't flinch. "He's not a threat. He's still human. They haven't taken him." "They will," I said. "And if you think the initiative cares, you're delusional." Her jaw tightened. "Then why work for them? Why do their dirty work?" "Because it pays," I said flatly. "Now get up. Last warning." For a moment, I thought she'd fight. Her hands clenched into fists, her body coiled like a spring. But then she slumped, defeated, and helped the boy to his feet. He was small, fragile-looking, but his movements were eerily precise. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly as I gestured for them to walk ahead. "You could let us go." "You don't know me," I replied, more to myself than to her. The shuttle ride back to the initiative outpost was silent. The woman and the boy sat across from me, their faces shadowed in the dim light. She glared at me with a hatred so pure it felt almost righteous. The boy just stared blankly ahead, his glowing eyes unblinking. I should have felt something. Guilt, shame, disgust. But all I felt was the familiar numbness, the hollow ache that came with knowing this wasn't the worst thing I'd done. When we landed, a squad of initiative enforcers was waiting. They took the boy first, prying him from his mother's arms as she screamed and fought. It took 3 of them to subdue her. I watched it all in silence, my pulse rifle slung across my back, my face blank. "Good work, Rook," one of the enforcers said as they hauled the woman away. "Your payment's already been transferred." I didn't respond. I just turned and walked away, the screams still echoing in my ears. That night, I found myself in the starport's grimy cantina, nursing a glass of something that smelled like jet fuel. The place was crowded, filled with scavengers, smugglers, and mercenaries like me, people who'd sold their souls for a chance to keep breathing. "Rook," a voice said from behind me. I turned, hand instinctively dropping to the knife at my belt. The woman standing there wasn't initiative. Her clothes were rough, practical, and her face was a map of scars. She slid into the seat across from me, ignoring my glare. "Tessa Marlowe," she said, extending a hand. I didn't take it. "What do you want?" "I'm with the Black Tether," she said, leaning in close. "We need your help." I laughed bitterly. "You're joking, right? Do I look like someone who's interested in joining the good fight?" "No," she said, her expression grim. "You look like someone who knows what it's like to lose everything. Someone who understands what we're up against." "And what's that exactly?" I asked, taking a sip of my drink. She hesitated, then slid a datapad across the table. I glanced at it, my implants automatically passing the data. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a planet, or what was left of one. A charred husk floating in the void, its surface cracked and lifeless. The destruction wasn't random. It was surgical, precise, Eidolon tech, but far beyond anything I'd seen before. The Eidolons think they're saving us. They believe unity is the only way to survive what's coming. But their version of saving means turning us into machines, stripping away everything that makes us human. We need to know what they're planning, what they know about this hunger. And the only way to get those answers is to hit them where it hurts. "And you think I care?" "I think you care more than you want to admit," she replied. "And I think you know the initiative isn't going to save us." She wasn't wrong. But that didn't mean I was ready to jump into another fight. I'd tried that once, and it had cost me everything. Not interested, I said, standing. Find someone else. I felt her hand on my arm, stopping me. You're not a monster, Morgan, no matter how hard you try to be. You have a choice, don't waste it. I shook her off and walked away, her words echoing in my mind. I told myself I didn't care, that I wasn't a hero. But the truth was, I wasn't so sure anymore. By the time I got back to my ship, the datapad was already in my hand. I stared at the image of the destroyed planet, my implants analyzing it in excruciating detail. The numbers didn't lie. Whatever had done this wasn't just powerful, it was unstoppable. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that it wasn't my fight. But the truth consumed me. A slow, corrosive force wearing down my resolve. The Eidolons weren't just a problem for the Resistance, they were a problem for all of us. And if Tessa was right, if this hunger was real, then maybe their madness had a method to it. It was a long night, the kind of night where every decision you've ever made creeps out of the shadows to mock you. I'd walked away from a lot of things in my life. Causes, people, morals. But this? I wasn't sure I could. The next morning I found myself walking through the rust-streaked corridors of the Black Tether's hideout. It was hidden deep in the bowels of an abandoned mining colony, the kind of place that reeked of stale air and desperation. Tessa was waiting for me in the command room, a grim smile on her face. "I was starting to think you'd bailed," she said. "Not the first bad decision I've made," I replied, stepping inside. She motioned for me to sit, and I did, scanning the room. The others were already there, a ragtag group of fighters, techs, and scavengers who looked like they'd been through hell and back. None of them seemed particularly thrilled to see me. "Rook's in," Tessa said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "He'll be leading the mission." A man with a scar running across his cheek scoffed. "We're putting our lives in the hands of an initiative dog." "Great." "Enough," Tessa snapped. "Morgan's the best we've got. You don't have to like him, but you'll follow his orders, or you'll stay here." The man muttered something but didn't argue further. I didn't bother defending myself. Let them hate me. It was easier that way. Tessa brought up a holographic display of the Flesh Forge, the twisted biomechanical monstrosity looming above the table like a spectre. "This is our target," she said. "The Forge is a processing facility, one of the largest in this sector. It's where the Eidolons turn captured humans into drones. But it's also where they store critical intel, battle plans, resource networks, Hive Nexus coordinates. That's what we're after." She glanced at me. "You've dealt with this kind of thing before. What's the plan?" I studied the display, my implants parsing the data and overlaying potential strategies. The Forge was a fortress, layers of defenses, overlapping patrols, and redundancies built on redundancies. Getting in and out would be a miracle. "We'll need a distraction," I said finally. "Something big enough to draw their attention while we slip inside. Once we're in, we move fast, grab the intel and get out before they can regroup. And if anyone hesitates, they're dead." The room fell silent. Tessa nodded, her expression grim. "We leave at first light." The shuttle ride to the Flesh Forge was deathly silent. The others kept to themselves, either by choice or because of me. I wasn't the type to inspire trust, and I didn't bother trying. The hull vibrated beneath my feet, a constant reminder of the thin metal skin separating us from the void. I focused on that noise, using it to drown out the voices in my head, the ones that didn't belong. Tessa sat across from me, her face obscured by shadows. She was studying the team's equipment, rifles, disruptors, and a few charges of improvised explosives cobbled together from scavenged tech. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. But you take what you can get when you're trying to fight an enemy that could rewrite your DNA with a thought. "The Forge is 10 minutes out," she said, breaking the silence. Her voice was clipped, businesslike, but there was an edge to it. Anger, maybe, or fear. "Everyone knows their role." A murmur of assent rippled through the group. I didn't bother replying. She knew I'd do my part. Not because I believed in her cause, but because if I didn't, I'd have nothing left to live for. The others were younger, idealistic. I could see it in the way they clutched their rifles, their knuckles white with determination. They still thought they could win. I envied them for that. Hope is a dangerous thing. It gets you killed. The forge came into view through the shuttle's viewport, and even I had to suppress a shudder. It was a biomechanical monolith, a twisted amalgamation of flesh and metal. Dark metal arms reached outward from its core, reaching out into space like the grasping fingers of some ancient god. The sight of it unsettled me, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. "This is it," Tessa said. "Remember, we're here for intel. Get in, get out. No heroics." The drop was rough, but we landed undetected. The forge's outer shell was a labyrinth of angular conduits and shifting membranes. Every step felt like walking through the belly of some monstrous beast. "Stay close," I muttered, gesturing for the others to follow. My implants were already scanning the area, mapping out potential threats and exit routes. The overlay flickered occasionally, a reminder of the system's instability. The first signs of what the forge was came quickly. We passed clusters of pods, human-sized cocoons made of glistening organic material. Inside, I could see shapes moving, twitching, people, or what used to be people. Their faces were obscured, their bodies covered in a layer of biomechanical growth. Some of them still moved, weakly thrashing against their restraints. Most were still. One of the younger members of the team, a wiry kid named Harvin, stopped to stare. "What the hell is this?" "The processing line," I said coldly. "They strip away your individuality until there's nothing left but obedience." He swallowed hard but didn't say anything else. The deeper we went, the worse it got. The forge wasn't just a factory, it was alive. The walls rippled as if breathing, and the floor beneath our boots felt soft, almost fleshy. Occasionally we'd pass conduits filled with a viscous black fluid. It reminded me of blood, though I wasn't sure if it belonged to the forge or its victims. We reached a junction, and Tessa motioned for us to stop. "Intel room should be through there," she whispered, pointing to a narrow corridor lined with what looked like metallic veins. "Morgan, you're on point." I nodded and moved forward, keeping my rifle raised. My implants buzzed, warning me of energy signatures up ahead. Drones. I held up a hand, signaling the others to stop. "Drones ahead, stay quiet." The drones were humanoid, their bodies sleek and metallic with traces of organic tissue. Their heads were featureless, smooth domes with a single glowing slit where their eyes should have been. They moved with eerie precision, their steps perfectly synchronized. I motioned for the team to hug the walls as the drones passed. My implants ran a predictive algorithm, charting their patrol patterns. Timing was everything. "Go!" I hissed when the moment came, and we slipped past the patrol without incident. The intel room was a large, open chamber filled with what looked like organic terminals, nodes of flesh and metal. Tessa moved to one of the terminals, pulled out a data spike, and inserted it into the node. "How long?" I asked, keeping my rifle trained on the entrance. 5 minutes, she said. "Maybe less if the system doesn't fight me." The others spread out, keeping watch. The tension in the air was suffocating. Every sound, every flicker of light felt like a prelude to disaster. The first scream shattered the silence. I whipped around to see Harvin being dragged into the darkness. His screams cut off abruptly, leaving only the wet, tearing sound of flesh being ripped apart. The thing that emerged from the dark wasn't human. It had once been, maybe, but now it was a twisted amalgamation of flesh and metal, its limbs tipped with sharp claws. Its face was a nightmare, half melded with a metallic mask. The room erupted into chaos. The creature charged, its movements a terrifying blur of flesh and metal. Pulse rounds tore into its torso, each shot staggering it, but failing to bring it down. Its erratic, frenzied movements made it seem almost impervious to pain or logic. Another monstrosity emerged from the shadows, then another. The forge itself seemed to rebel against our presence. throwing everything it had to keep us trapped. One of the creatures sprang toward me, claws slicing through the air inches from my face. Instinct kicked in as I dropped low and fired point blank. The round hit its mark, blasting its head into a wet spray of gore that painted the walls. The scent of burning flesh filled the air, acrid and choking. A team member went down nearby, clawed at by one of the things. I surged toward them, firing into the creature's back until it slumped. Grabbing the wounded fighter by their collar, I hauled them upright, every muscle screaming with the effort. Behind me, Tessa was at the terminal, extracting the data. Sweat glistened on her brow, her focus unshakable despite the carnage around us. The creatures closed in faster than we could react, faster than we could retreat. One of them leapt toward her, but a barrage of fire from another team member sent it careening into a twisted heap. There was no time left. The swarm was growing. Every second we stayed was a second closer to annihilation. Tessa yanked the data spike free from the terminal. It was done. It was time to go. The retreat was hell. The drones were on high alert now, their patrols converging on our position. We lost 2 more people before we reached the extraction point, a breach in the forge's outer shell that led back to the shuttle. The others scrambled through the breach ahead of me. I stayed behind, firing round after round to cover their retreat. My rifle's barrel seared red hot, the stench of scorched metal filling the air as it overheated. Dropping it, I drew my sidearm, each shot finding its mark with precision. But it wasn't enough. The creatures kept coming, their grotesque forms tearing through the narrow corridor. A sharp tug at my arm broke my focus, and I was yanked through the breach just as the swarm closed the distance. Clawed limbs and gnashing metal teeth filled the gap behind me as I hit the deck of the shuttle, the hatch slamming shut with a clang. The engines roared to life, vibrating through the floor as the craft lurched violently upward, breaking free from the forge's suffocating grasp. We were down to 4. 4 out of a team of 8. Tessa sat across from me, her face pale and streaked with blood. Some of it hers, most of it not. The others were silent, their faces haunted. "We got what we came for," she said quietly, holding up the data spike. My hands were shaking and my implants buzzed, feeding me fragments of data I didn't want to see. Death tolls, probabilities, tactical failures. "Rook," Tessa said, her voice cutting through the noise. "You did good." I laughed bitterly. "Tell that to the ones we left behind." Her expression softened, but she didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. We both knew the cost of what we were doing, and we both knew it wasn't over. It took us 3 days to reach the Black Tether's hideout after the Flesh Forge raid. The shuttle was dead silent for most of the journey, save for the occasional grunt of someone patching up a wound or shifting uncomfortably in their seat. The ride back wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. Everyone was too busy grappling with what they'd seen in the forge to talk. I spent most of the time replaying the mission in my head, scrutinizing every move, every choice. I knew it wasn't healthy, but I couldn't help it. My implants made sure of that. Failure wasn't something they let me forget. The Black Tether's hideout felt smaller than before. It wasn't the layout, those same dark corridors carved out of rock, the noise of ancient power generators straining to keep the lights on. It was the absence of people. Our losses were a tangible thing. I sat in the corner of the ops room, my back against a rusted crate, watching Tessa and the techs work on decrypting the data spike we'd stolen. "Got it," one of the techs muttered, her voice tight with concentration. She adjusted the display, and lines of code unfurled, reorganizing into recognizable patterns. Tessa leaned in, her face drawn. I watched her reaction as the first images appeared. Communications between Eidolon emissaries and human factions. The screen showed corporate leaders, warlords, and even a few faces I recognized from the resistance. The conversations were brief but chillingly clear. "Assimilation guarantees survival," an Eidolon emissary said in one recording. Its voice was calm, mechanical, yet layered with something disturbingly human. "The hunger will not spare your people. Unity is the only path forward." On another recording, a warlord sneered, his face scarred and bloated with arrogance. "You want my armies? Fine. But I want more than just survival. I want power. Make me a leader in your collective, and I'll hand over the rest." "This can't be right," one of the techs whispered. How many factions have already—" "Too many," Tessa said, her voice like steel. She looked over at me. "Morgan, you seeing this?" I nodded, my implants parsing the data and overlaying probabilities. "This isn't a negotiation. It's a done deal. The collective's already won half the galaxy." Tessa's hands clenched into fists. "We need to warn the others. Rally what's left of the resistance before it's too late." "Warn them about what?" I asked. "That their leaders sold them out? That their choice is between assimilation or extinction? They'll figure it out soon enough." The room went quiet. The techs exchanged uneasy glances. Tessa just stared at me, but I didn't care. I wasn't wrong. Tensions boiled over the next day. The data we decrypted spread through the black tether, igniting debates in every corner of the hideout. Some argued we should reach out to the factions negotiating with the Eidolons, try to convince them to resist. Others believed we should prepare for war, even if it was a war we couldn't win. It didn't take long for the fractures to show. I was in the common area, cleaning my rifle, when Harvin's replacement, a man named Cole, slammed his fist on the table. "We can't fight them," he said, his voice sharp with frustration. "We barely made it out of the forge alive, and now you're talking about taking on an enemy that's already won? It's suicide." "And what's your alternative?" another voice asked. It was Benson, the scarred resistance fighter who'd been the loudest advocate for war. "Roll over? Let them rewrite our brains and call it peace?" "It's better than extinction," Cole shot back. "You've seen the recordings. The hunger doesn't just kill. It wipes entire civilizations out of existence. The Eidolons might be our only chance to survive." "At the cost of our humanity," Benson said, his voice low and dangerous. "Is that a price you're willing to pay?" Cole didn't answer, but the silence was enough. I stayed out of it. Let them tear each other apart if they wanted. My focus was on the datapad in front of me, scrolling through intercepted transmissions. I wasn't looking for hope. I was looking for a pattern, something that would give me an edge. But all I found were more confirmations of what I already knew. The resistance wasn't just losing. It was crumbling from within. By the third day, tensions in the Black Tether had reached a boiling point. The intel from the Flesh Forge was clear. Factions across humanity were already submitting to the Eidolons, choosing survival over resistance. The arguments raged endlessly, whether to fight, negotiate, or simply disband and go their separate ways. Finally, Tessa made a decision. We need answers. If we don't understand what we're up against, we're just fumbling in the dark. "What does that mean?" Benson asked, his voice rough and skeptical. "It means we contact them," Tessa replied. "The Eidolons. We request a meeting." The room erupted into chaos, voices overlapping in protest. "You're joking," Cole spat. "You're going to ask them for a chat after everything they've done?" "We're already losing," Tessa shot back. "If there's even a chance we can learn what they're planning, what the hunger really is, we have to take it." "They won't just let us walk away," Benson growled. "You know that, right?" "I know it's a risk," she said. Then her eyes flicked to me. "Morgan, thoughts?" Everyone turned to me. I let the silence hang for a moment, my focus on the datapad in my hands. Finally, I said, "If you want answers, this is the only way to get them. But you better be ready for the price." That was all it took. The room quieted, and the decision was made. A broadcast was sent using coordinates we'd extracted from the forge. No demands, no posturing, just a simple request to meet. For hours, we waited in tense silence, wondering if the Eidolons would even respond. When the reply came, it was clear, precise, and impossible to ignore. "Come to the designated location, unarmed. We will talk." The station where the meeting took place was an eerie monument to humanity's long-dead ambitions. Its hull was a patchwork of damage, pockmarked with the scars of forgotten battles, orbiting a decaying moon that cast the entire structure in a pale glow. The shuttle docked without a sound, and we stepped into the airlock. The interior was hauntingly empty. There was no resistance, no traps, only the overwhelming sense that we were being observed. We entered a vast central chamber, and there it was, the emissary. It was humanoid in form, but that only made it more unsettling. Its body was sleek, mechanical, with glowing veins of organic material running beneath its surface. Its face was blank and smooth save for its eyes, twin orbs of light that seemed to pierce through you. "You came," it said, its voice resonating through the chamber. "Good, I hoped you would." No one moved. Benson's fists clenched tightly at his sides, his tension radiating through the room, while Tessa's expression was as sharp as broken glass. I stayed quiet, letting the tension hang. "You requested a meeting," the emissary continued. "You wish to understand, so I will show you." It raised its hand, and the air around us shimmered. Suddenly, the chamber was filled with projections, planets crumbling into black voids, starships obliterated in an instant, civilizations erased as if they'd never existed. My implants buzzed as they tried to process the scale of the destruction. It was incomprehensible. "This is the hunger," the emissary said. "It does not discriminate. It does not hesitate. It consumes. Entire species, entire worlds, gone. We faced it once. We survived because we adapted, united. You will not survive otherwise." Benson spoke, his voice low and cold. "And you think turning us into drones is the solution? Stripping us of everything that makes us human?" The emissary turned its head as if pondering the question. "Assimilation is not destruction. It is evolution, adaptation. Humanity's individuality is a weakness that will doom you. But united within the collective, you will survive." Tessa finally spoke, her voice sharp. "What you're asking isn't survival, it's slavery." The emissary turned to her. "Slavery implies coercion. What we offer is choice. You see what's coming. Would you truly choose annihilation over unity?" The silence that followed was suffocating. My implants buzzed louder, feeding me probabilities and data I couldn't focus on. For once, they had no clear answer. The emissary looked directly at me. "Morgan Rook, you've seen the truth. You understand the futility of resistance. Why do you fight?" Its words hit harder than I expected. My hands clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms. "Because peace isn't worth the price you're asking." The emissary regarded me for a long moment, its glowing eyes unblinking. Finally, it nodded. "You're not ready, but you will be. Soon, all of humanity will understand." With that, it turned and walked away, its footsteps echoing through the empty chamber until it disappeared into the shadows. The shuttle ride back was quieter than usual. No one spoke, not even Benson, whose jaw was tight with unspoken frustration throughout the meeting. I stared out the viewport at the stars. The doubts I'd been burying for days clawed their way to the surface. The resistance was breaking. Humanity was already surrendering. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if we were wrong to fight. But I wasn't ready to give up, not yet. The ride back from the meeting with the Eidolon emissary haunted me. Even 3 days later, the silence lingered. No one in the black tether was willing to confront what we'd learned, not openly. The scattered remnants of humanity weren't just losing, they were folding, assimilating, surrendering to survive. I couldn't stop replaying the emissary's words in my head. "You're not ready, but you will be." They weren't a threat. They were a certainty spoken with the cold finality of someone who'd seen the end of the story. The hideout was quieter than it should have been. Usually it was filled with the sounds of life, heated arguments, the clatter of tools, the buzz of equipment barely holding itself together. Now it felt empty. Tessa had disappeared into the command room. Benson paced restlessly, and Cole sat staring at the floor. I'd kept my distance, retreating to the farthest corner of the base. My hands itched for a distraction, but even cleaning my rifle felt pointless now. My implants buzzed, processing probabilities and tactical overlays. They couldn't compute a solution to this. There wasn't one. I finally saw Tessa again the next day. She was sitting at the main console, her face illuminated by the glow of the monitors. I walked in, expecting an argument. Instead, she just turned the screen toward me. "You should see this," she said quietly. It was a broadcast, a live feed from a colony on the edge of known space. Once it had been a hub for corporate mining operations, but now it was barely holding itself together. The feed showed lines of humans standing in a barren plaza. At first, I thought it was an execution. Then I saw the Eidolon drones. They weren't killing anyone. They were administering the process, those glimmers of light, the implants threading through flesh, the dull looks of acceptance on the faces of those being altered. The broadcast didn't cut away. It lingered on every moment. The voiceover was calm, almost soothing. Assimilation ensures survival. Join the collective, secure humanity's future. "More propaganda," I muttered. "This isn't propaganda," Tessa said. "It's live. This is happening across dozens of colonies, maybe hundreds, and it's not just the fringe worlds anymore. Corporate hubs, scavenger colonies, even some resistance factions." She turned to me, her expression grim. "Morgan, we're the minority now." She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "They're not forcing it, you know. They don't have to. People are lining up for it. Families, whole communities. They're choosing this because they don't see another option," I said. "Because we've failed them." She didn't argue. She was right, and so was I. Humanity wasn't just choosing assimilation. It was running to it, arms open, because the alternative was annihilation. The next day I found Benson in the armory. He was organizing the weapons like it still mattered, checking power cells, calibrating pulse rifles, running diagnostics on the few explosives we had left. His movements were sharp, almost violent, as though channeling his frustration into the task. "You're wasting your time," I said, leaning against the doorframe. He didn't look up. "Funny. I was about to say the same thing to you." I stepped inside, my boots scuffing against the floor. "There's nothing left to fight for, Benson. You've seen the broadcasts. They've already won." "They've won because we stopped fighting," he snapped, finally looking at me. His eyes were bloodshot. "They want us to believe it's over, that resistance is futile. You're falling for it, Morgan." "You think I like this?" I shot back. "You think I'm ready to give up? I'm just not interested in pretending we can win a fight that's already lost." "That's where you're wrong," he said, his voice quieter now. "Winning doesn't matter. Fighting does. We might not save everyone, but we can still save something." I stared at him, my jaw tight. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was clinging to a dream that had already burned to ash. But part of me envied him, the part that still remembered what hope felt like. That night, Tessa called a meeting. It was supposed to be a strategy session, but it quickly spiraled into chaos. The debate that had been simmering for days finally boiled over. "This isn't betrayal," Cole said, standing near the edge of the room. "It's pragmatism. The Eidolons aren't our enemies. They're our only chance." "At what cost?" Benson growled. "You willing to trade your soul for a heartbeat? Your humanity for survival?" "It's better than extinction," Cole shot back. "You think you're some noble martyr, but you're just a coward. You're afraid to admit the fight's over because it means you've been wasting your life." "Enough!" Tessa's voice cut through the argument like a blade. She stood at the head of the table, her hands gripping its edges. "This isn't about who's right. It's about what's left. If anyone wants to leave, do it. But don't come back." The silence that followed was deafening. Cole left without another word. So did two others. By the end of the night, only a handful of us remained. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the command room staring at the stars through the cracked viewport. The cold, unblinking void offered no answers. I thought about the emissary, about the broadcasts, about what Tessa had said, what Benson had said. They were all right in their own way, and they were all wrong. In the morning, Tessa found me. She didn't look surprised. "I figured you'd still be here," she said. I didn't respond. She sat down beside me, her voice softer now. "You don't have to do this alone, Morgan. We can still fight. Together." "Fight what?" I asked, my voice bitter. "The collective, the hunger, humanity itself?" "All of it," she said without hesitation, "because the alternative is letting them win." I turned to look at her, searching for something in her expression. Hope, conviction, maybe even desperation. What I saw was resolve. It wasn't enough to change how I felt, but it was enough to make me pause. "I don't know if I can," I admitted after a long silence. My voice felt small, foreign. "I've been fighting my whole life, and every time it feels like it means less and less." She nodded, her expression softening. "Then don't fight for them. Fight for yourself. For what's left of you." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I could. When she finally stood, her voice was steady but quiet. "If you're still here by midday, we'll make a plan. Together. If not..." She hesitated, then sighed. "I hope you find whatever you're looking for, Morgan. I really do." She walked away without another word, leaving me alone with the stars. By midday, I was gone. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Maybe I didn't know myself. I just knew I couldn't stay. The Black Tether wasn't my fight anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. I found a desolate outpost on a barren moon, the kind of place no one cared about. The air was thin, the nights long and cold. It was perfect. For weeks I stayed hidden, watching the broadcasts from a distance. Colony after colony fell to the Eidolons, not with a bang, but with a whisper. They weren't conquered. They surrendered, and the galaxy moved on without me. The final broadcast came on a quiet night. I watched as the last major human faction, one I'd once fought for, announced its assimilation. The speaker's voice was calm, almost serene, as they explained the decision. They spoke of unity, of survival, of a future that no longer belonged to individuals but to the whole. I stared at the screen until it went dark. Then I stepped outside into the cold, empty night. The stars were bright, unblinking, their light sharper than I remembered. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold bite of the air in my lungs. I was alone, one of the last free humans in the galaxy, and I was okay with that. I sat on the edge of a ridge, the barren landscape stretching out before me. The void above was vast, infinite, and indifferent. For the first time in years, the voices in my head were silent. I didn't know how long I had left, maybe weeks, maybe days. It didn't matter. Better to die as myself than to live as something I didn't recognize. And so I waited for the end, staring at the stars. Cold, unblinking, honest.